It's the That's Enough Out of You podcast. I'm your host, Bill Rader, and joining me as always is my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean, how you doing?
What's up, Billy? How's it going, pal?
I'm doing pretty good. We're kind of in an in-between right now in my house, in between sports, so we're not as crazy anymore, but we're finding some shows to watch. We started watching that show on HBO. By the time this post, it'll be over, but that it's called The Last of Us, and we watched the first couple episodes. It's pretty good. It's based on a video game, actually.
Really? No, I haven't even heard of this one, Billy.
I never heard of it either until a few months ago. You know who's in it? Is that Pedro Pascal?
Okay.
He was in Narcos, and
right.
He's the Mandalorian.
Okay, right.
So he's the star of it, and then he was also in Game of Thrones for one season, and then the other star is this young girl. Her name is Bella Ramsey. She was also in Game of Thrones.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, worth checking out if you like those kind of shows, like The Walking Dead, that kind of show. That's kind of what it's like so far. But yeah, pretty good. Doing just trying to do things to relax a little bit, hopefully in between, like I said, in between sports. But
I hear you, buddy. I just got back from baseball camp, so
yeah,
revving up for baseball season, buddy.
It's always something, Sean. There's rarely downtime. Let's put it that way. We got my daughter, who's in high school. Her track season starting up real soon, so we'll be doing that every day. So
good to keep busy, buddy.
Oh, see, it keeps you young, right? Keeps you young,
like a kid again, pal.
Hopefully. All right, let's get started with the topic today. What do we got, Sean?
Bill, we got a good one. We do so much negative stuff on this show. You know, we're going to talk about some positive tonight. We're going to do JFK in the space program and the moon landing. And it's going to be, mostly a positive show, Bill, because most of our shows, we get so negative sometimes, because of the information we're putting out there. But this is something that's got to be talked about, and it's an important discussion, and it's not talked about enough, Bill. But let's get into it, buddy.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So July 20th, 1969, space flight that first landed humans on the moon, Billy. Okay. The Apollo 11 launched by the Saturn V rocket at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And Neil Armstrong became the first person to walk on the moon. And now, Bill, we're not going to get into the conspiracy theorists about the moon landing was fake because, listen, buddy, we talked about conspiracies. It's to take it to the extreme. Everything is not a conspiracy. Sometimes it is, but the moon landing was not fake, Bill. I think NASA did a great job explaining the things like the flag and the shadows. And if anybody wants to look into that, it's all over YouTube. And I don't even want to, there's nothing down that road for us to even discuss and stuff like the Flat Earth Society, with members all over the globe. I don't even want to talk about that stuff. You know what I mean? You can't talk to the people, but we're just going to stick to the facts, buddy.
All right.
And JFK, early in his presidency in 1961, he said to Congress, Bill, he said, we're going to put up a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And when he said that, NASA was like, yikes, we don't have the technology even close to do that.
Yeah.
And even his old man Kennedy, he said, I knew Jack I knew that Jack was going to do something reckless. And that's what he did. And old man was like, what are you talking about, Jack? Why would you say that? But JFK was thinking big, Bill. And he put a ton of money into the space program, into technology, into education. And he gave that great speech at Rice University, where he said, we choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard.
Right. Yeah.
And JFK promoted science education, Bill. And he in the STEM programs, which Nate the Great is in, at school, advanced education for kids that are a little bit more advanced.
Yep.
And in the history of exploration, And I think, Bill, beating the Soviet Union in something other than war was important to Kennedy, And it's just amazing that he predicted that we would go to the moon by the end of the decade when the technology wasn't there, wasn't even close.
Right.
But he had that vision, and he was thinking long term. And I also, I think he believed, Bill, in the nuclear age. How do I say this? With the nuclear war age, that conventional war isn't possible anymore, and that any type of war is going to lead to nuclear war. And we talk about this on the podcast all the time, Bill. JFK was a peace president,
right?
And he didn't want war at all, and he knew that anything that's going to lead to nuclear war can't be an option. So the other thing is, Bill.
Well, Sean, he wanted to focus that energy and that, I guess, that money to doing something positive, right?
Something positive.
I guess his thinking was, if we start doing this, the Soviets will start doing it,
right?
And they won't. Instead of building nuclear weapons to kill us, maybe they'll focus their energy on trying to build a ship, a space.
Exactly. And Bill, to him, it was for the better of humanity. It wasn't really just about, U.S. and Soviet Union, or even like Democrats and Republicans. This was about all humanity. Like, we got to do this for humanity.
Yeah.
And one of the things about the Kennedys, they were all so competitive. And the old man would say, second place is not good for a Kennedy. And there was a story, Bill, where JFK was playing chess with RFK, and JFK was about to lose. Something I know because Nate the Great's been tearing me up in chess. But JFK, RFK was just about to checkmate him. He had him, and JFK tips the table over, Bill, knocks all the pieces on the floor. And then he says to his brother, he says, well, I guess we're never going to know who would have won that one. And that's just the way they were. They were so competitive, Bill.
Yeah.
And, this was a way to win a geopolitical situation without the risk of war. And he actually did, though, entertain the possibility of going to the moon with the Soviets, Bill. They did talk about that. And Khrushchev's kid mentioned that in a book that he wrote. And he said that his dad said that he didn't really want to do that because America would know what they didn't have. Because how the Russians always said they had a lot more than they actually did.
Right.
And we would have found that out. So, but he did try to do that, and he did try to, this was for the betterment of humanity. And he really put a lot of effort into education, technology, and into the space program.
And if you think about it, Sean, I mean, today, we've sent spacecraft to Mars. For us, the moon is almost like, it's like passe. Like, we've been there, done that. But at the time, we couldn't even imagine. I mean, people couldn't even imagine getting a vehicle to leave our orbit and to get to the moon. I mean, that was just inconceivable almost.
It really was, it really was. And he just had such vision for it, Bill. And then, so then Alan Shepard, Bill, May 5th, 1961, he was the first American to travel into space. And once he comes back, Bill, I think then JFK is all gung-ho, because JFK was so afraid of dead astronauts. He was a military man. Mm-hmm. And he has so much respect for what astronauts do and the training they have to go through. And John Glenn would become a real good friend of the Kennedys, Bill. And also, JFK was a Navy man, so he loved exploring the ocean, and he would call space, the new ocean. And one of the things he did, Bill, a lot of the great schools are up in his state up there in Massachusetts, like MIT and Harvard, where he went. Yeah. And a lot of the technology and stuff was there. But he didn't want to put a lot of the space money into his own state for something that, remember, a lot of people were against, because, like you said, they didn't think we could do it. It was unimaginable. So he didn't want to put, a lot of the space programs in the Massachusetts, because politically it wouldn't look good for him. So what happens is JFK and LBJ start investing in NASA and space operations in the South. Okay. And that's the one thing that JFK and LBJ agreed on was the space program. And they both, supported NASA going all the way back to the 50s, Bill. And what they do is they set up NASA stations and satellite stations all through the South in Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Florida. It was huge there, Bill. And the thing is, I think there was a political aspect to doing that because we talked about this. JFK struggled in the South. As popular as he wasn't popular in the southern states because of two reasons. Number one, civil rights, and number two, because he was a Catholic. And I think this was a way, that he felt could help him in 1964 because his plan was to say like, hey, to the Southern Democrats that were against him, he could say, I'm giving you all this money, creating all these jobs, creating this tech corridor in the South, in your area, in your states. How about changing your stance on civil rights, or how about at least being a little less vocal on it?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there was that political aspect to the whole thing too, Billy.
I'm sure that was a factor, Sean. I wouldn't doubt if it was also something as simple as the weather, right? I mean,
well, sure, that factors in.
Yeah. I mean, they're looking to launch spacecraft. They want to make sure that most of the time they're going to have decent weather, clear skies, and you're not going to have that in Massachusetts all the time.
Right? I know that, buddy, especially in the winter months.
Right.
Yeah. So the next thing, Bill, this is probably the only negative part of this whole discussion tonight.
Yeah.
There's no way to discuss the space program without discussing Wernher von Braun.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'm not going to spin it, Bill. I'm not going to try to spin it. Wernher von Braun was a Nazi scientist.
Yep.
And he was brought over under Operation Paperclip by our old nemesis, Alan Dulles, our resident bad guy every episode.
Right.
He brought Wernher von Braun and he brought over a lot of these Nazi scientists, put them in the space program, put them in the intelligence. And Wernher von Braun built the Saturn Apollo rocket, the Saturn V rockets that took us to the moon. There's no way to say, like, you have to say that I don't think we would have got there without Wernher von Braun.
Oh, I agree.
And that's a really, there's no way to spin it because he is a Nazi scientist.
Right.
And he comes over and he becomes friends with Walt Disney. And he goes on like Disney shows where he's teaching space to kids. And he was a Hitler scientist, and he would work for NASA.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a pleasant thing to think about. I'm Jewish, obviously. And I don't, not that anybody has hopefully any of our listeners have any love for Nazis, but
right.
That's just a part of what had to go into this space program to make it work.
And Bill, and I'm definitely not sticking up for Wernher von Braun, but I think as far as the whole Nazi buy-in, like, I don't know if he was really a hardcore believer in the Nazi way, but he was a fanatic about space,
and
I think that's where his real mindset was, but he did commit war crimes, Bill, because he created the V-2 rockets during World War II that hammered Great Britain. I mean, there's no way to describe it. They hammered Great Britain. And, Dulles brought him over here from 1945 to 1950. And then he ends up working at White Sands, New Mexico, where Uncle Jack was actually stationed for a while. And that's near Roswell, New Mexico, Bill, where, the alleged UFO crash happened in the 40s.
Yeah. Area 51 or whatever it is.
Right. Yep. And the thing is, Henry Luce, who we talked about a lot on the show, he owned Time Life magazine, and he had JFK in the 50s now. JFK is a young senator, and he brought him on with Wernher von Braun, and they were together to be judges for the Time Person of the Year. And Wernher von Braun would later say about JFK, he would say that guy's going to be president because he was so impressed by JFK's intelligence.
Wow.
And JFK, this had to be the most difficult conversation for Kennedy, Bill. JFK talked to Wernher von Braun about his own brother, Joe Kennedy, who was killed and he was a combat pilot who was killed during the war.
Right.
And he was old man Kennedy's pick to be president before JFK.
Right. Yeah.
He was killed, Bill, and he was killed trying to take out the missiles in underground caves in France called the Operation Aphrodite. Okay. And those missiles were created by Wernher von Braun. So Joe Kennedy was killed by missiles created by von Braun. So imagine the difficulty of that conversation, Bill.
Yeah.
Because when Joe was killed, they blew the missiles up and they weren't able to get out of the blast radius, Bill. And, the explosion that killed him, nothing was found. I mean, just completely annihilated,
Wow.
and that had to be such a difficult conversation. But again, Kennedy understood, Wernher von Braun is probably our best bet to get into space.
Yeah.
So that's just an interesting thing. And then when JFK gets into office, he hires James Webb to take over NASA. Now, Webb, Bill, was skeptical right from the beginning. He was skeptical about Wernher von Braun. He didn't think we had the technology to get to the moon. And he felt that, we should put our interest and our investment money into satellites and building the best satellites to put up there. He didn't think it was possible to get humans up there. And I read a lot of the transcripts, Bill, from between JFK and Webb. And it's really interesting because Webb is a really smart guy, obviously, very intelligent, and he comes off very condescending in these and almost disrespectful, Bill, to Kennedy. But JFK was very good at that, where like with Lyndon Johnson it was his way or the highway. He didn't want to hear what anybody else said. But Kennedy also, he wanted to hear, what his other experts that he hired has to say, even if he was on the other side of the argument. He would like to give them a voice, So the back and forth between Kennedy and Webb was just amazing to read through and to hear how, Webb was just so skeptical. But
Right.
JFK totally disagreed, Bill. And he said, we need to focus. We need to build up the space program. We need to put money into this. And we're going to do this by the end of the decade.
Well, and I think, Sean, something we probably should mention is it's not just getting a man to the moon. It's also he gets back, and that was part of that speech the speech he gave to Congress, and what was it, 61, where he said,
right.
So because I mean, can you imagine something happening where we put these men on the moon and then we lose them, or they die or something? I mean, that essentially ends the space program right there.
It does, and Kennedy was really worried about that. He mentioned that,
Yeah.
He was worried about that, but we ended up doing it, and we ended up, and he didn't live to see it, but it was because of his work, because of his efforts, and the money he put in was able to sustain all this time. And one fact about the moon landing, Bill, is that Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, they left a packet up there, Bill, on the moon to honor the Soviet astronauts that died in their attempts to go to space.
Okay.
And before Kennedy was assassinated, on his trip to Dallas, the day before, he was in San Antonio, Texas, and he was at Brooks Air Force Base, and he was promoting this, going to the moon, and he was talking to the Space Medicine Center there, and he was talking about healthcare and CAT scans and dialysis machines, and that all those things were spin-offs of the same technology we're using to go to space. And, the same technology is used to develop them. So, you got to give LBJ credit too, because I bash LBJ constantly on the show, but
right.
I got to give him a little credit here because he continued JFK's policies. And, I think, besides the space program and civil rights, it probably was, he changed everything else. Right. So maybe he could just stand on his high horse and say, hey, continuing Kennedy's space program and civil rights, but, and then you wouldn't look at he's changing everything else. But I do got to give him some credit for that because, he continued that, Bill.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in the thing is, in '67, Bill, there was a disaster, the Apollo 1,
Right.
and it blows up, 3 astronauts die. And this is when a lot of people came out against it, Bill. Like a lot of people didn't like it to begin with. Now you have a lot of anti space people out there. And the thing is, what JFK put into place sustained. And Johnson, to his credit, even during the Vietnam War, because remember, Bill, America's in a bad place during this time period. Like America, the Vietnam War is raging out of control. We talked
Yeah.
about that. We had 2 shows on that.
Right.
In this, when they finally get to the moon in '69, this was a sense of pride that the country really needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's amazing, Bill, that it happened. It happened under Richard Nixon because he really didn't really care too much for the space program, much like Eisenhower didn't. And he did a lot of cuts on the space on NASA, but we still were able to sustain and get there. And when we did, Bill, Nixon gives a speech and he never mentions JFK, if you could believe that.
That's a shame.
That's Nixon.
Yeah.
But the thing is, NASA did, Bill. NASA mentioned them.
Right.
And they said, because they knew without JFK, this wouldn't have happened. And once they came back, Mission Control put up JFK's pledge from the speech in May of '61. And, underneath, they put task accomplished, Mr. President. Like I said, this was a sense of pride because it was during the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And even during the Vietnam War, Johnson was able to keep the NASA budget on track. And in '67, he proposed an outer space treaty, which barred putting nuclear weapons up there and other objects on the moon. But Nixon cut the budget. And to go back before Kennedy, nobody really cared about space. Eisenhower didn't really believe in it. He didn't want to put any money into that. And, NASA was really created under him, but it was really for like weather satellites and spy satellites. Eisenhower never believed that, going to the moon would be possible. But Kennedy, to his credit, he always believed that. And it's amazing, Bill, that he said we're going to go to the moon by the end of the decade when the technology wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So he put the money in, he put the education to make sure that the technology would be there by the end of the decade. And it was.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing, I think that's one of Kennedy's accomplishments, that because it didn't happen, he wasn't able to see it, and it didn't happen during his presidency, the moon landing, that, I don't think he gets the credit he should get for the space program. What do you think about that?
Oh, I agree, because, he was dead by that point, I think. And Nixon not mentioning him certainly doesn't help. But I think, we have the Kennedy Space Center. And,
sure.
And I think that's a fitting tribute. But, I don't know. I do hear that speech that he gave at Rice University. I hear quite often.
Speech.
And, you think about those things. I remember when the space show, when the first shuttle took off, from the Kennedy Space Center, and that was one of my earliest memories of something so significant happening. And that kind of started my, I don't want to say fascination, but definitely appreciation for the space program. And, just reading about it and reading about, how much Kennedy did. And then you also, you think about it, Sean, and I don't have anything in front of me. I don't have any research, but you think about how much of the technology that we have today. Just look at our, at our phones, our computers, things that we use every day. How much of those things came about because of all of the money and the research and everything that was.
Yeah, great point.
This initiative to get to try it as fast as we could.
He mentioned like healthcare, Kennedy, like how like the CAT scans and all that technology was the same technology.
Yeah.
So you're right. Like how much other technology that got advanced because of what we put into, the same development for the space program.
Yeah.
That's a great point,
Yep.
And Kennedy believed in it. He put in a ton of money and he never backed down, he never backed down from it. And I will give Johnson credit, though. Johnson saw it through, because once the Vietnam War starts raging, Bill, and Johnson was so into that, he could have definitely cut the budget on it, and he didn't. So as much as we bash him, and I said a lot of bad things about Johnson, and I still think he was not a good president, but I got to give him credit there. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
So before we move on, is there anything, because I think we have to end this discussion, Bill. There's no way to avoid the gorilla in the room, Bill. We got to address the UFO phenomenon, even if it's just for a few minutes. I think, when you're talking space, you have to talk about what's going on right now, because You got these space balloons and you got the government admitting there's UFOs. And I said this before, Bill, the government won't admit that Oswald is innocent, but they're admitting that UFOs is a real thing they can't explain.
Right.
It's amazing. It's like they're one day they're gonna bring out the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, and a gray alien at a press conference, and they still will say Oswald is guilty. It's amazing. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Yeah.
But the UFO phenomenon, Bill, is something that I've always been interested in. And, because Nate the Great is so into science, we watch a lot of science shows. We watch, how the universe is made and stuff. And I understand that how massive the universe is, and that, there has to be other life out there somewhere. But I don't subscribe to, that these aliens are here to colonize the planet. I mean, what are they waiting for?
Right.
I think a lot of this is government technology that we shouldn't have. And it could be like or that, they don't let us know that we have. It's more advanced than what we're known to have. And maybe even like the Air Force doesn't realize that. Like this could be like the Air Force going back to Project Blue Book, investigating the UFO phenomenon. And here the CIA is running another operation, that they don't know about under their books, of technology, using technology that's very advanced, that the rest of the world doesn't know we have. And even our own parts of our own government don't know. You know what I'm saying? And that's where I think a lot of this stuff falls. I think it's the government. I think it goes back to the government screwing around. What do you think?
I don't know. Me, Sean, I'm more of a realist, and I always think there's some logical explanation for what people are seeing, for what's going on out there. Could it be? I mean, I'm not, not narrow-minded enough to think that we're the only living beings in the entire universe. I'm sure we're a very tiny fraction of existence, of life, but I still need to see evidence of it. I still
sure. I totally agree. And then the thing is, Bill, the universe is so massive. I mean, for another alien life to get to where we are, I mean, the technology they would have would be so advanced. I mean, it's just, it's not like you said, show me the proof.
Right.
And a lot of this stuff, though, Bill, a lot of this stuff could be explained, I think, but then there's a lot of these sightings and stuff that they can't explain. And I really think a lot of it is the government has technology. Like some of this could be high-level drones.
Right.
That they have, like a lot of these sightings, I think, are drones, Bill. When they see all these different lights in the sky and stuff, I mean, we have a lot of technology, Bill, that I don't think, that like at Skunk Works and Area 51, there's definitely stuff there that the government doesn't want, the rest of the world to know they have.
And that wouldn't surprise me. And when I've heard people make the argument, well, if aliens were going to come, wouldn't they send large ships? Wouldn't they come here en masse? And I think to myself, well, what are we doing? Like we're sending these tiny little rovers to Mars.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's all we can do right now. So maybe that's all these other species can do. They can send out these little rovers or little, like you said, drones to different parts of the universe. And so that maybe that's what we're looking at, but I don't know. I will certainly defer to experts and what they tell me. I guess I'll have to believe because I don't really have a choice, but I would like to see with eyes if there are these explained these unexplained, craft that are out there that can do things that possibly create.
Well, sure, they have that one from that Navy ship, Bill, and it was going at speeds and directions that not possible.
Right.
So there is stuff. What's that?
I've seen the video. I've seen the footage, and it's amazing.
And it's amazing though that the government comes out and they say, we have this stuff now after really ridiculing UFOs for 100 years. Now all of a sudden, there's stuff out there we can't explain, and they're admitting it. So to me, Bill, the cynic in me, I'm thinking they're misdirecting from somewhere else. Like there's something else they're trying to cover for that they don't want us to know about. That's what I think.
Well, as Fox Mulder says, the truth is out there.
The truth is out there. And that was a great show. The X-Files was a great show. But if you're, thinking that any of that is factual, I mean, come on.
Right.
Show me the evidence, Bill. That's what I want to see. Show me the evidence.
Exactly. That's what I say.
So we had to touch on that, Billy, and maybe down the road we could do a show on, the MJ-12 and the UFO phenomenon, because Dulles' name comes up in all this UFO cover-up stuff, and James Angleton and people we talk about, E. Howard Hunt, their names come up all the time.
Yeah.
Curtis LeMay. But, but getting back to the point, JFK, the space program, Bill, what a tremendous accomplishment. And like you said, what about the spin-off technology that we used it was the same development, right. And all the stuff that we have today, CAT scans and dialysis machines, and who knows, maybe our phones and everything, Billy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, he believed in it. He put the money into it. He put the money in the education technology, and he built up NASA. And, we got a guy on the moon, Bill.
And it's a point of pride for us. It's a point of pride for
sure, especially during Vietnam, Bill.
Right. Yeah.
That was important to happen during the Vietnam War, because the morale in the country was so bad. And you're going to have these people that say that the whole thing was faked. I mean, we had the technology because JFK put the money into it, and he put the education into it, and he put the emphasis on doing it by the end of the decade.
Yeah.
That was the point he wanted. It had to be done by the end of the decade. And we did it.
Yep.
And the astronauts, they're just amazing people, Bill. And JFK understood that. So, it's good to talk about some really positive stuff for a change, Bill. Instead of all the negative stuff we always talk about.
All right. Good job, Sean. I enjoyed that. It's good discussion. Good topic.
And if anybody gets a chance, you could look up the documents, and I could send it to anybody that they want them with James Webb from NASA talking to JFK, because everybody should read them, Billy. I mean, it's just fascinating back and forth between the two of them, because here you have the head of NASA who didn't believe that we could get to the moon, and he didn't even want to try. He wanted to put, the emphasis in satellites, and we shouldn't be even wasting our time with this. And Kennedy was so strict in his belief that, no, well, this is what we're doing, and you better get on board. And it's just great back and forth between the two of them. And then I would have loved to heard that discussion between him and Wernher von Braun, because that had to be one of the most difficult conversations, to talk about his own brother.
I can't even imagine.
Nah, unbelievable. But again, that's a leader, Bill.
Right.
That's what we're lacking, I think, ever since that assassination, we're lacking.
It's somebody who put the greater good ahead of his own and his own party. And, that's right. That's exactly.
It wasn't about Republican, Democrat. It wasn't about even America and the Soviet Union. It was, for the good of humanity.
Right. Advancing society. Yeah.
Yep. So, all right, buddy. Anything before we wrap it up?
No, good job. Good job as always, Sean.
All right, buddy.
All right.
And that's enough out of you, all those moon landing fake people out there.
That's enough out of you. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.